Thank you for coming. So it was proven conclusively this morning that among the many things you could say about me, being a man of Issachar is not one of them. I know you think, what are you thinking? So if you remember in 1 Chronicles 12, there's a collection of men in Israel, and one of the groups that's collected are the men of Issachar. And the real reason they're chosen is because they understand the times. They understand the times. And so there I was at 7:01 this morning. It's 8:05 on my watch. 7:01 this morning, 30 miles away, leisurely going through our morning routine, when I was happily scrolling through the First Baptist Church Instagram page and realized that this was Spring Forward Day. So you can imagine the excitement as I walked into my lovely and talented wife, and I said, not to panic or anything, but today is Spring Forward Day, and we need to be leave for church in 28 minutes. So here we are. Something like that. It was an exciting morning. After the end of an exciting week, to begin our second time in the book of Ecclesiastes. So today is March 12th, and among the interesting things that happened on this date, it was on this date in 604 BC that Pope Gregory the Great died. Pope Gregory the Great. We all know Pope Gregory because he was the one who did a lot of things for the church, but he's also the one who promulgated the use of chants. When you hear about a Gregorian chant, we've all heard that, right? That's Pope Gregory. He's the guy that did it. He died on this date in 604. In 1455, we have the first record of a Gutenberg Bible being printed. You know, we talk about the movable type or the printing press. And the Gutenberg Bible, Johannes Gutenberg printed it. He had actually printed it the year before, but this was our first reference to having it, was on this date in 1455. In 1622, Ignatius of Loyola was declared a saint. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot to the First Baptist Church of Downers Grove, but to those of us who graduated from Loyola University, raise your hands. Yay! We just like to keep an eye on this sort of stuff. But let's see what else happened. In 1773, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable founded a settlement along the shores of Lake Michigan, which would later come to be known as Chicago. Chicago being the Indian word, I believe, for onion or smelly onion or something along that line. Draw your own conclusion there. In 1894, Coca-Cola was sold in bottles for the first time. Which just made me think, what were they doing before then? I don't know. Maybe they were just, in the I don't know, whatever. But in 1908, J. Wilbur Chapman did his first revival, his first organized revival of the city of Philadelphia, and this was an experiment that he had done where he recruited 21 evangelists, and they divided the city into 42. Evangelists and song leaders, and they divided the city into 42 regions, wards, settlement blocks, districts, and 42 districts, and then had a 3-week-long revival where they would go from one to the other on opposite nights. And then he was in the center, preaching in the center. And at the end of this particular revival, there were reported 8,000 conversions in Philadelphia. And it's interesting because, again, it was one of the first times in modern times where you had that organized an attempt to go into a revival. Haven't really done, certainly recently there hasn't been anything like that, just because it takes a lot of, you got to find 21 evangelists that are willing to take 3 weeks and all of that. So it was easier to do back in the 08s. FDR's first fireside chat was on this date in 1933. And I confirmed this because it had to do with one of the classes that I was in this past week. One of the interesting things about FDR's fireside chats, okay, we've all heard of those, right? I'm not going to ask who was there, but we won't. None of them took place by a fireside. Just interesting, just in case you think that FDR is sitting by a fireside. No, of course, remember, it was on the radio. So he could have been sitting anywhere. But it was just, that was what a news reporter referred to it as, and the name stuck. And so, you kind of think, oh, FDR's fireside chats, well, he did those weekly. Well, actually, over the course of his 12 years as a president, he did 33 of them, which is hardly weekly. Okay, he did them for a while and then said, okay, we're done. But then every president at one point, not every, but a lot of presidents at one time or another have tried to recreate that moment. Many of you some of you may remember that at one point in Jimmy Carter's presidency, he literally did a speech wearing a cardigan sweater next to a fireside to talk to the American people. And I don't know how successful the speech was, but I do know, I remember reading that the sale of cardigan sweaters went way up after that. So that's it. And then finally, speaking of great literature, it was on this date in 1957 that The Cat in the Hat was published. So, a story we read I was about to launch into, I like them here, I like them there, I do not like them anywhere, but that's not The Cat in the Hat. That's Cat in the Hat is thing 1 and thing 2, right? Or is that The Cat in the Hat comes back? I'm sorry. I called it great literature, and then I don't even know what they are. So, all right. Well, we're going to get back into Ecclesiastes, and I was telling Debbie this morning that I have reached the point, and this is going to sound weird, like everything else I say is completely normal, but I have reached the point after listening and reading and studying that I like the book of Ecclesiastes. I know that sounds kind of odd. It's like, and it's not that I dislike the book of Ecclesiastes, but again, whenever you get to Ecclesiastes, you kind of go, what is this? You're like, okay, it defies easy explanation. It defies easy placement. How did this get here? But I think now, and as you go through, and once you kind of get an understanding of the big picture, and hopefully we'll get that today, it starts to fall into place and make sense, and you can kind of go, okay, that's why that's there. Okay, and there's some great verses in Ecclesiastes. I think I'm going to, one of these days when I want to get into the entrepreneurial urge, is I will create a set of Ecclesiastes coffee cups, which is Bible verses from Ecclesiastes on there, and just, the Bible says, like, for example, my favorite one at this moment, it's in Ecclesiastes 10, so I have to save it for later, but my favorite one at the moment is that money is the answer to everything. That's in the Bible. So do you know the Bible says that money is the answer to everything? Really? I thought it said the love of money is the root of all. It does. Yeah, it does. So what's your point? So we'll get to that in chapter 10. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We began our discussion last week talking about it. We talked about wisdom literature, which is the type of a literature type of writing that it is. And we talked about the different components of that. We talked about the structure of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so there are two. The book has a frame structure. Okay, that is, there are two, there are two speakers involved. Okay, and I say that I put the asterisk there just to note that as opposed to two writers. So it's a slight difference from last week. There's two speakers involved. It could be the same person. Again, and we use the example of a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. Oh, here, you want to? A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. I'm sorry. I'd seen you earlier, so I thought you were here. Yeah, I assumed you had one. Where a guy's walking through a cave, he meets a guy, and they have this conversation, and the guy in the cave says, well, let me tell you my story. And so the majority of the book is the story of the Connecticut Yankee, but then at the end of the book, you go back to the first guy in the cave. So that's kind of a frame structure. So there's two writers, okay, or two speakers involved, okay. I believe it's two different people, but again, that's just kind of a question of what you think. Okay, and so verses 1 through 11 of chapter 1 represents the frame narrator's introduction or summary of Qohelet's thoughts. Okay, and we talked about who Qohelet is. That is, it's translated teacher in the NIV. It's translated preacher in the King James. The word actually comes from the Hebrew word, which translates into the Greek word that we get ecclesia from, which means gatherer, or gatherer of the assembly, or teacher of the assembly, kind of thing, which is why it's called Ecclesiastes. Okay, but the word is actually Qohelet, and it's usually spelled Qohelet or Kohelet. And that's what I'm going to refer to the writer as we go through. Tradition, and we had a discussion about whether it was Solomon or not. And I said that, well, you generally believe that it's Solomon or somebody who wants you to think it's Solomon. And the point there was that this is Solomon's view, whether Solomon actually said it or somebody wants you to believe Solomon said it. This is what Solomon thought of the world during his lifetime, or perhaps near the end of his lifetime. And some of the reasons for that is because they talk about the great wealth, king in Israel, son of David, great wisdom, and tradition for years and years and years and centuries has said, oh, this is Solomon writing this. Some of the reasons against it is that he does not name himself. Okay, if it is Solomon, why not just say this is Solomon writing? Okay, and to me that's it weakens the position. If it is in fact Solomon, to not say Solomon kind of weakens the position. To me, that's my opinion. Again, this is something that many good people disagree on. I said one of the discussions we had last week was that another issue is that all these injustices are spoken of. That if there are all these injustices and you're the king in Israel, why don't you do something about it? Paul, I think it was made the point, a good point, that perhaps he's pointing out that even though I'm the king and have all of this authority, I still can't change this, and so that would argue for the Solomonic authorship. Okay, so again, either one is fine. I mean, you can agree with me that it's probably someone else, or you can go off on your own errant way. I'm kidding. So let's get back into Ecclesiastes, and we'll see how far we get today. So Ecclesiastes, beginning with chapter 1, verse 1, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. And we talked about that. First, verse 2, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Now that's going to be the first coffee cup in the Ecclesiastes coffee cup collection. Okay, so things that will start a conversation, meaningless, everything is meaningless except coffee. Somebody will put that on one of those. I'm looking around, I don't see one here. You've seen those like Hobby Lobby sort of inspiring, artsy things, That's going to be the first one. Meaningless, everything is meaningless except coffee. I guarantee you there are people that will buy that. Okay? So there's a fundraising idea for the church. Here we go, But regardless, everything is utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. And of course, those of us who grew up with the King James, are in your head, you're going, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, saith the Lord. Okay, so the word vanity, the word meaningless, comes from the Hebrew word hebel, or it could be pronounced hebel, H-E-B-E-L. Hebel. It's translated several different things, and I did not fill out my own handout here. So vapor is the King James. Breath, air. What's the one that starts with M? Vanity. I'm sorry. Yeah, vanity in the King James. Futility in the net. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I had a tough morning this morning. You know what I'm saying? It was. Did I mention we got here in 24 minutes? I know that's I got my whole this in just 24 minutes. I know you're all really impressed. Like, wow, that is amazing. Yeah. Okay. Hebel is translated meaningless in the NIV, vanity in the King James, and futility in the Net Bible. Different ways. And the trouble is, this is a tricky word. Now, outside, it's used about 60 times in the Old Testament, and half of those times are in Ecclesiastes. And outside of Ecclesiastes, when the word is translated, it usually means something along the line of wind, vapor, or air. Okay? And so looking at the context, but this construction, this way of using it is only in Ecclesiastes. So that's one of the reasons why Ecclesiastes is such an interesting book, is because like every word, I mean, there are, it would not surprise me to find out that there are literally dissertations written on the meaning of Hebel. Okay, there are certainly journal articles written on the meaning of Hebel. There are articles in different, like Christian magazines, World or Christianity Today on the meaning of Hebel. But generally, it has to do with, something that seems apparent but isn't. Okay, from a particular perspective. Okay, and that's something that we're going to get to later. Okay, so because when you look through this, if we look at meaningless, when we talk about something being meaningless today, and when we use in 2023, we say, well, that's meaningless. Then our first reaction would be, well, why bother? Why do it? And if you want to go all existential, negative existential, you look at it and say, well, the Bible says it's all meaningless anyway. What difference does it make? It's all meaningless. Okay. In the King James, when it translates at vanity, the problem with that is they're using vanity in the sense of meaning in vain. Okay, now when we think vanity, we think of somebody who's bragging about how good they look after 24 minutes of preparation. Okay, but the 1600 meaning of vanity would be it's in vain. Everything is in vain, as opposed to vanity. Okay, if you look in Proverbs 31:30, just one page back, okay, just kind of another example of it used in a similar way. This is part of the Virtuous Woman chapter, verse 30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. So fleeting that's the word that's translated Hebel, or it's from Hebel. So beauty is Hebel. Okay, and so, the thing is, you look at something or talking about a person, male or female, you say, oh, that's a very handsome person, or that's a very beautiful person. That's a real thing. You can see it, and people appreciate it, okay? And so it isn't necessarily okay, well, don't waste your time with that, okay? So, again, I think you all would have been a little disconcerted if I would have just rolled in here in my Loyola University t-shirt that I was wearing, because again, this is the day that Loyola became a saint. So being loyal to my favorite saint, that should be a sitcom. My favorite saint. I'm sorry, the Catholic Church is going to put out something, whatever it is the Catholic Church puts out. I don't know. I was going to say a fatwa, but that's not the Catholic Church. That doesn't do that. I'll be editing this part out of the video. We don't need that to go up on the internet. But so the word usually means something transitory or temporary. Okay, so again, it's a tricky word to translate, because even as we go through, when you say everything, okay, there's something about the nature of the word everything is that it includes, everything. Okay, so we could say this chair that's part of everything. What we're doing here in this room is everything. What we're doing Sunday morning, that's everything. It's all, when you go home and have lunch, that's, everything. It's all, and even as we go through Ecclesiastes, there's some, we'll read some stuff and we'll go, yeah, that's a pretty good idea. Well, yeah, that's true. I see how that, and if everything is meaningless, then, so again, in the 20th century, okay? So, but from Qohelet's perspective, everything is meaningless. And so we'll get to what Qohelet's perspective is in a minute, okay? So utterly meaningless, where he says everything is meaningless, or utterly meaningless, that is simply, in the Hebrew, that is just hebel hebel. Okay? Sort of along the same line that we talk about King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Song of Songs, meaningless of meaningless, vapor of vapor, utterly meaningless. So this is part of, there's going to be a three-part refrain that Qohelet is going to keep bringing up. Okay, and this is one of the keys to it. Okay, and everything is Qohelet. Everything is temporary. Everything is transitory. Okay, from Qohelet's point of view. Okay. Verse 3, we start getting into we start getting into the frame narrator's summary of what Qohelet is going to tell you. And again, remember I gave you the example of somebody showing you a video and saying, here, look at this video, watch when he does this, and when he says this and he says that. And you watch it, and then it gets over and it goes, did you see where he said that? So this is where Qohelet, or the frame narrator is saying, okay, this is what Qohelet is going to tell you. Watch this. Watch for this. Okay? Or, you know, when you see the frame narrator is the person who types in on the Instagram video or something, wait for the end. Okay? Do you ever do that and you wait for the end because you're a sucker like me and you're waiting for the end and you get to the end and you're like, okay, what was I waiting for? You know, maybe it was just they were just seeing how many people would just wait for the end. I don't know. Okay. So, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Okay. And when they say, what do people gain? The actual word there isn't like, the word there is better understood as being left over. Okay, what's left over? All right, I mean, you know, because you could say, I gained $100 from working. Okay, that's what I gained. You could say, I gained it. And the question isn't what do they gain, the question is what's left over. So I earned $100 from you know, a day at the salt mines, but it cost me $200 to live that day. So what is left over? Okay, that's kind of the question. At which they toil under the sun. Okay, so under the sun is the next phrase that we need to understand. Okay, kind of get an idea of, and this is where it gets interesting. Under the sun. Now, under the sun is used 30 times or 29 times in Ecclesiastes, and the phrase is not used anywhere else in the Bible. Okay, so we're looking at Qohelet's view of things that happen under the sun or under heaven. Okay, so the point here, and I think, is you're looking at it, and again, this kind of gets back to I have to remember not to wander too far off that way, because, you know, anyone who's watching will go, where'd he go? Kind of, they'll hear me. I'm still here. Don't go. No. Under the sun is contained within the earth, contained within our planet. Okay. Under the sun is, again, this is, Ecclesiastes shows the life as a result of the fall, the reality of life as a result of the fall, you know, how things are without God's intervention. Okay? And when we get down to it, we're going to talk a little bit about that, where Qohelet starts talking about the evil task that God has given people. So under the sun means things that happen just on earth, you know, in the real world kind of thing, not from an eternal or a heavenly perspective. Okay, so once we start understanding that absent a beneficent, a helpful, a loving God, absent a personal relationship or a God who really wants to fellowship with people, in light of the fall, this is what life is like. And we mentioned this last week to discuss that one of the reasons why it's important that this book be linked to Solomon is because this shows the truth of life when Israel was at its peak. I think it was Karen was talking last week that said that there was this brief moment in time when Solomon was the king, that Israel was a world power. Okay, it's probably the only time, a very short period of time. And so it's important that this be linked to Solomon in that they say, listen, when Israel was at its peak, when all indications were that God's blessing were flowing absolutely 100% on Israel, this is how life was. There were still these inequities. There were still these issues. Okay? And so you'd think, given the number of issues or commands that are given in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch, about taking care of the poor and taking care of the people around you and all that kind of stuff, that at the point that Solomon was the king, there would have been no poor in Israel. Okay? But there were. Okay? So under the sun, when we talk about, this is this earthly perspective. Okay? This is what it looks like from an earthly perspective when you talk about under the sun. And so you can go through and you can look at passages in Ecclesiastes, and you think to yourself, on the one hand, you think to yourself, well, that can't be right. But then you think, wait a minute, the perspective that Qohelet is giving us is this is what the life is like under the sun. And you go, oh, okay, I see it. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm not saying it's right, it's good kind of thing. I'm just saying this is what we, I don't have to like it. You ever have a discussion with somebody, well, I want to, can I take the family car and drive 120 miles an hour down the road? No, you can't. But I want to. So you can't. Well, there's a couple of reasons why you can't. One, the car will fall apart. Okay, our car will fall apart. Okay. Our car, I get questionable on the highway. 65, 70, I'm like, I don't know, kind of thing. But, the car will fall apart. And the police frown on that kind of thing. Okay? Like, very much so. Actually, that's probably not true. They probably really like to see people going 120 miles an hour because you can really throw the book at somebody that's going 120 miles an hour. It's like drag racing or doing that kind of a speed in a car. This has nothing to do with Ecclesiastes. But I'll edit this part out too. If you get a ticket, and I know because you all look like the type that will do 100 miles an hour in the car, like when you get up, realize 24 minutes before you have to leave that the time is switched. Yeah, we did not do 100 miles an hour in the car. Debbie would not be nearly as calm if we had done 100 miles an hour in the car. But yeah, you lose your license, and it's like 6 months, and you got to go through all kinds of stuff. Not that I know from personal experience. I'm just told. I read an article about it. I don't know, something. Saw on Instagram, wait till the end kind of thing. That was where I got it. Okay. But the word under the sun is similar to under the heavens or on earth. Because those other phrases are used in Ecclesiastes as we go as well. Okay, so again, we're getting this perspective, this earthly perspective. This is how it is on earth. Life on earth in the absence of a relationship with God, in the absence of a God that cares about us. This is what it's like. Or, not pursuing that particular relationship. Okay? What do people gain from all their labors? Okay? What do you get? What's left over? And then he starts going on. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. Okay? The earth outlasts us. Okay? Our houses are going to outlast us. I don't know. My house might not. But most of the time our houses outlast us. Friday, I was teaching I was actually teaching a class at Bolingbrook, a U.S. history class. And we were talking about World War II and the effects of the World War II on the population. And because I'm that kind of a guy, I brought in my dad's war ration books. My grandparents were what we called back then, we called them pack rats. Now we call them hoarders, but it's like, so it's like we have these things, right? And you've got this thing, this war, if you guys know what I'm talking about, right? The war ration book. It's got my dad's name on it. He's 7 years old, 4 feet tall, kind of thing. It's great fun. And so I'm passing them around to the class, right? I put them all in plastic because I didn't want the grubby little hands on, But one of the kids, this is this is today's youth. One of the kids looks at it, immediately gets his computer out and does a Google search on the address to see the house, to see where the house is, because it has my parents' address. It was my grandparents' address, 7110 West 71st Street. And I'm like, and I'm looking, I'm like, what are you doing? I want to see what the house looks like. It's like, okay, we haven't lived there for a very long time. Okay.
I wanted to see if you grew up in a castle.
Yeah. I'm like, but the house outlasted my grandparents. Okay. The house outlasted my grandparents. And, I remember the first time I went to the house in Blue Island where I first lived. It was right. It was shortly after I approached the mid-century mark as far as age goes. And I remember looking at the house, and I realized this was the first time I'd ever looked at a house, and I could literally say, I was here 50 years ago. That's kind of some of you know what I'm talking about, others don't, but that's okay, you will someday. Well, you go, I was here 50 years ago. But, and the house is still there, and that was my grandfather's house, and that house has outlasted him. Okay, and he's like, what's left over? Okay, and it's interesting because we're going to come back to this when Qohelet starts talking, when he starts talking about inheritances. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. Okay, so he uses three nature illustrations that indicate that nothing really changes. Okay, I mean, one commentator talks about Ecclesiastes as showing how did he put it? The monotonous sameness in light of the illusion of change. Which, when I was in the fast food business, I know you. It was a miserable time for both me and the fast food business because I'm not that much of a foodie, and I don't know if you know this, but if you're going to go in the restaurant business, it really helps to be a foodie. It really helps to care about food. If you're the kind of guy that will eat just about anything put in front of you, you're not good for the restaurant business. Okay, but that was when at the time I was working for Burger King, my illustrious start to my career, where they started doing the 2 drive-through windows. Okay, if you remember, those of us who go way back, there used to only be 1. And then they did these 2 drive-through windows. Okay, and I remember the explanation at the time was that it did not speed up the process. Okay, it didn't speed up the process of getting you don't get your food any quicker because there are 2 windows there. Okay, but you think you do. Okay, you think you do. And that's why they did it.
It's an illusion.
Yeah. So it's like this illusion of change, but things really remain the same. You're sitting in line just the same amount of time, but you think because there's this movement, you think you're getting it quicker. Okay? So again, one of the things is this monotonous sameness in light of the illusion of change is one of the kind of the themes of it. But he gives these 3 nature illustrations. The streams keep flowing. I'm sorry, where am I? The sun keeps coming up. Sun keeps coming up, keeps going down, keeps coming back. Okay, the sun keeps coming up, the wind keeps blowing, and the rivers keep flowing. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. And this is with apologies to the Roman Heraclitus. He's the philosopher, poet who said you can't step in the same river twice. Well, he and Qohelet might not agree on that. Okay, is it just there? All still, river's still there, kind of still there. Every once in a while, I'm sorry, I forgot where I was going with that. I'm sorry. So, all things are wearisome, more than one can say. Okay, and his point here is that if everything on earth remains the same, so does life. The realities of life, the dynamic of life, this is what Qohelet is going to tell you. He's going to just show you how everything is going to remain the same. Okay? The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. And I think that this passage, this is at 8b, verse 8b, has an interesting parallel with Isaiah 6 to me. And Isaiah 6 is the one where that's where God tells Isaiah, go out to this people, and they're going to be ever hearing and never learning. And it's the passage in Acts 28 that Paul repeats, you guys are always hearing, never listening, kind of thing, which to me is that kind of an interesting comparison there, okay? But again, this is just, yeah, we're learning all kinds of stuff. We're learning all kinds of great stuff, all right? So, I mean, to a certain extent, and have anybody heard the expression? The more things change, the more they stay the same, okay? So again, there's people with the same problems today that they had 100 years ago. It's kind of interesting that, you read things or a story of somebody 100 years ago and you go, oh yeah, we still have that problem. We still haven't fixed that, mostly in regards to, interpersonal relationships or government or things like that, okay? And he says, what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun, okay? So again, these are, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. Is there anything, verse 10, is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? Now, when I was a kid, my dad used to, had this thing he would tell us every now and then, and it was usually when we were explaining some really super clever act of villainy that we were going to do, or were accused of, or something like that. And my dad, who in 1942 was 4 feet tall and all that, but he would say, you kids think you're so smart. You kids think you're so smart. There is nothing you have done that we didn't do before you. Now, this is my dad, who was born in 1934, which, again, to the kids of 2023, that's like, good grief. Was he a Roman or something? Was he in the Roman Senate? No, 1934. And he's like, there is nothing. And I mean, all the time he'd say this. Because we'd come up with some statement. We're going, oh, yeah, we're going to do this. You kids think you're so smart, and over and over again. And I think that's what Qohelet, what the frame narrative is. This is what Qohelet's going to tell you. You guys think you're so smart. You guys got it figured out. I mean, if you've got a kid that they, as they get older, they start figuring things out, right? And they come up to you and like, this is what I'm going to do, and you want to say that's a really dumb idea, and of course, being the good parents that we are, we don't say that anymore, right? We don't look at our kids and say, you things are so smart. No, I don't think I've ever said that. Have I ever said that to our kids? Unless I'm quoting my dad. My dad used to say, how you can say that without actually saying it. They're giving you something and you say, well, my dad used to say. And it's just my dad saying, your grandfather might, kind of thing. So is this something new? Okay, and he says, it was here already long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations. And again, for a history major, this is really sad. And of course, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'm doing my part to make sure we all remember things that happened in the past. Okay, but no one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Well, this is, buckle in. This is going to be a fun, doesn't matter. Another thing that my dad would say on occasion, it's like, don't take life too seriously. No one gets out alive, kind of thing. It's like, okay, and it's kind of sort of the same idea. Maybe my dad is Qohelet. Maybe that's who it is. But no one gets out alive. Don't take it too seriously. Nobody gets out alive. Then when I would tell him that my plan was to drive the car at 120 miles an hour, he'd say, no, you're not going to get out of this alive. Probably not if you're driving the car at 100 miles an hour. Okay. No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. Okay. And again, we all, as we get older, we notice this. Things that were super important to us that are just part and parcel, are very warp and weave of our life. Warp and woof of our life. You know, when you do the weaving, warp and, you know, this is intertwined with our very existence. Maybe you've had this experience where you explain it something, you make a reference to that to somebody, and they just, what are you talking about? Okay, I remember there was a period of time when I was utilizing a trainer to, you know, now I just look like this on my own. And the trainer that I had at the time was I think she was a 24-year-old girl, and I went in this workout day, happened to be Ringo Starr's birthday. Okay, and I said, hey, you know, today is Ringo Starr's birthday, and I kid you not, she looked at me and said, who's that? I fired her right at that point. I'm like, how can you? But again, it's like, wait a minute, you know. For those of you who don't know, Ringo Starr was a drummer for the Beatles. It was this group in the 60s. They were pretty big. Okay, but it was like, you know, if you're of that certain generation, you know who Ringo Starr is, and that was an integral part of your, and again, it's like, so 20-year-olds, and again, every once in a while, I'll be in school, and there'll be a kid with like a Beatles shirt on, or the Doors, or some group from the 60s, and you'll say, are you actually a Beatles fan? No, this was just in my drawer. Okay. All right, it's like, wait, okay, so we don't, I mean, come on, your concert T-shirt is a statement of who you are, right? It's like, no, it's just in the drawer, you know? Or sometimes you say, what's your shirt mean? And I have to look down to see what their shirt says, because they don't remember what the shirt was that they put on, you know? But, so verse 11, sadly, no one remembers things. And I say sadly being the history aficionado, etc. Okay, so where am I? Verse 11 ends the frame narrative summary introduction, and verse 12 starts Qohelet's story. Okay, so you'll notice that in verse 12 we go to the first person. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. Okay. So Qohelet was the king over Israel in Jerusalem. Now, when you look at that, there were only 3 kings over Israel in Jerusalem. There was David, there was Solomon, there was Rehoboam. Okay? Because Saul was not king over Israel in Jerusalem. David was the one that made Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Okay, so one of the authorship questions is that when you say you're a son of David, then you automatically eliminate David. You can't be David and be the son of David at the same time. So you eliminate David. Rehoboam, for all practical purposes, was not king for that long. Well, he was never king of Israel in Jerusalem. I mean, he took over and this country split, and he went up to, I want to say Dan, or I don't know where he went to, moved the northern capital up. So there were kings of Judah in Jerusalem, but not kings of Israel. Now, maybe that's a splitting hairs, could be, but by the time this was written, or put together at least, the kingdom had already split. So really, it's like, okay, there's only the one king in Israel, and it's really to say that of all the kings over Israel and Jerusalem doesn't really say a whole lot. You know, that's like you're saying, you guys should pat me on the back because I have done the greatest job of being Stan Ray Jr. in the world. As far as I know, there's only one Stan Ray Jr. in the world. So you're thinking, okay, great, you know. But if I say I am done the best job of anyone in the world of anything named David, then you think, okay, wait a minute. There's been hundreds and hundreds and thousands of Davids, and it means something to say that you're the best David of them all. So if you look at this literally, he's comparing himself to himself, if it is in fact Solomon. But if it's somebody who wants you to believe it's Solomon, looking at it from that perspective, it's not quite as limiting to, this is why, again, I prefer the not Solomon authorship argument as opposed to the Solomon authorship argument. But it's certainly the Solomonic perspective of life at the peak of Israel. But I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Judah. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. There's that, under the heavens. I'm going to see what life is really like, okay? His task is to examine everything under the sun. I really do need to fill out my own. I remember what it's supposed to be. Okay. Pardon me?
It's a heavy burden?
No, that comes up later.
Oh, sorry.
Or maybe it is. Because I know, yeah, I think that should be, that where it says A, that should be an H. Okay, so he says, I'm going to do this. And he says, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. Now, two things here. First of all, that phrase, heavy burden, okay. Another way to translate it, two other translations that I'm looking at, one by Tremper Longman and one by Robert Alter. So I have three different translations that I'm dealing with here. Translate that as evil business or evil task. Like what an evil business it is. Okay, what an evil business. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. All right, now here's the thing. Here's another point. It says God has laid on mankind. Okay, the word God that's translated in Ecclesiastes is the word Elohim. Okay. Somebody, that's church discipline going on next door. Somebody, you know, it's the word Elohim. Okay, and without getting into, and again, I know there's books written on the different names of God, but basically Elohim, think of it as the creator God. Okay, what isn't used is the Hebrew word Yahweh, which is the covenant God. When Moses is so, I am who I am, it's Yahweh, the covenant God, the God that interacts with the people of Israel. That's Yahweh. That's the word that's used to describe that God. Okay, so this is the creator God. And so it is almost, when you start looking at this under the sun and you talk about the reality of God, you talk about the reality of God, the creator God, it almost is a deistic perspective. Or perhaps it is a deistic perspective. The idea that God created us, God created all of this, and then just kind of said, all right, you guys go do your thing. I'll come back in about a couple millennium, fix it all up, and whatever. So it's this deistic, that there's a God, he's out there, he created us, we're grateful to him, but he doesn't really have a whole lot to do with us. Okay? So, but it's the word Elohim. It is not the covenant God. Okay? So again, when we talk about what God has done in Ecclesiastes, he's not talking about with the covenant God, which kind of leads back into the idea of, well, Ecclesiastes is the story of what life is like absent the personal relationship of God, absent the covenant God. You take God out of the picture, this is what God is going to be, this is what life is like. Okay? His task is a heavy burden. Verse 14 gives us I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Okay, so verse 14 gives us Q's favorite statement. Everything under the sun is meaningless. That is Hebel. A chasing after the wind. So chasing after the wind, you think, I mean, as it's meant, and as we take it, we think, yeah, why would you do that? What's the point? How it's it's a task that you cannot do. Okay? It's worse than a Sisyphean task. You know what a Sisyphean task is? The story of Sisyphus who pushes the rock up the mountain. It gets to the top of the mountain and the rock falls back down. At least there you see the rock moving up. Okay, you're going to do it again, okay. But it's like chasing after the wind. It's like, it would be, why would you do that? You know, and if you say, what are you doing today? I'm chasing after the wind. Now, having said that, about a month ago, Silas and I were at a meeting, and we were a scout thing, and we started talking to this guy, and Silas will back me up on this. You can check. So Debbie, check, see if his story is valid. Kind of, you know, this guy we started talking to, just kind of being pleasant. I know that's hard to believe that I was being pleasant. Well, Silas was there, and he has to be pleasant. So, and this guy goes, you know what I started doing? I don't know this guy. So, no. What have you started doing? And he says, well, you know, I took this class at this school and this training session, and now I'm part of the weather trackers, tornado chasers. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. He goes, yeah, we get the weather reports, and then we get in our car and we go out. So these guys are literally chasing the wind. Okay, I'm like, I want to say, I don't know this guy, but I want to say, what is wrong with you? Okay, so I must confess, there is a concept of chasing the wind that I suppose makes sense. I don't, it's like, if I hear of a funnel cloud, driving to it is not the first list on my list of things to do, but there are people that like that sort of thing. But again, even that, you go, why are you doing that? What is the point? But again, it's chasing the wind. It's meaningless. It's meaningless. It's hebel. It's transitory. It's at best it's temporary. Okay, that's all we've got. All we've got is what is here in front of us. Okay. Now in verse 15, he starts, what is crooked cannot be straightened, what is lacking cannot be counted. So, I've seen all the things. I've seen all things, and this is my first conclusion, my first reflection. What's crooked cannot be straightened. What's lacking cannot be counted. Okay? We can't fix this. Okay? This isn't going to change. I'm telling you, this is how it is. Okay? What's bent, what's lacking can't be counted. You can't count what's not there. How much money do you have? Well, that's a real quick count because I don't have any. Okay? But I said to myself, let me see. This first reflection, humans can't fix this. Humans can't fix this. I said to myself, verse 16, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. Now, from one aspect, the next line, only David was king in Jerusalem before Solomon, if you're talking from an Israelite perspective. Now, he could be saying, because, Jerusalem was a central city in the region. And there were rulers, and there were city-states, and there were, So, okay. But if you look at it as saying this is kind of the thought process of somebody at this time, and the original readers would have looked at this and thought, oh, okay, all of those kings, Rehoboam, Jehu was a judge, Asa, Manasseh, all of those guys. I used to be able to list those. I took a class in school. I took an Old Testament class where you had to be able to write out all of the kings of Israel and Judah, kind of thing. But I can't do it anymore. I've forgotten things. What's the verse say? No one remembers the former generations, including me here, apparently, the history major. Okay? But I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. Now that is his introduction. That's because he's going to delve into it in a little more detailed. And his second reflection here in chapter 1, it says, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Okay? Now, if that's not a reason not to go to school, I don't know what is. Okay? So if your kids come up to you and say, listen, the Bible says, are you trying to make me sad? Are you trying to make me sad? Is that your goal? Because that's what the Bible says you're going to do. Actually, I think Qohelet is just warning us this isn't going to end well. This isn't going to end happy. Okay? Because with much wisdom comes much sorrow, the more knowledge, the more grief. He says, I'm really sad to have to report this. But here we go. Chapter 2. I said to myself, Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Okay? Okay, so reflection in verse 18, this is not going to end well. And then Qohelet desires to test pleasure. Chapter 2, verse 1 and following. I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. Okay? And, some would argue that those two just kind of naturally go together. If you start embracing wine, I don't know. I mean, there's a thing, there's, again, amongst the Hobby Lobby sort of things, there's an outrageous number of them that talk about wine. I don't know. It just seems like a fixation that, and again, I mean, no disrespect to the opposite gender, but it's, a lot of women, it's like, it's wine o'clock, or my girls and I get together and wine over things, WINE. A lot of these really nice things, there's no problem on earth that wine can't fix. I'm like, okay, these are in the school, I see them, in high school, there's, the kids here, like, okay, all right, you want to, but, and the interesting thing here, okay, it says, I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. Kind of like, don't worry, I haven't lost my wisdom here. Even though I'm embracing wine and embracing folly, I'm staggering around drunk, holding a bottle of wine, but I am still wise. Okay, I never lost my wisdom here. Okay, trust me, I'm a professional kind of thing, right? I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. And I think here is like, I'm doing this because, have you ever heard somebody say, listen, I read these books or I listen to this music so you don't have to? So this is Solomon, or, Solomonic, Qohelet going, I'm doing this so you don't have to. There's got to be something worthwhile to do. And I'm your guy. I'm going to do it for you. Don't worry, I'm not going to lose my wisdom about this. There's got to be something good to do. And then verse 4, and I'll finish with this passage here. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. This is actually Debbie's goal for our backyard. Just saying. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. She's not doing that. She's got me. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. And I'm assuming, you can look at that and say, okay, it's the harem that's the delights of a man's heart. Insert your own. Why would anyone want a harem? I can't afford the, whatever. Joke here, I'm not going to do that. So it'd be a long drive home, but or it could be all the previous things. These are the delights of a guy's son. So I did everything that any man would want. I had everything that any man would want. Okay? I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. But in all this, my wisdom stayed with me. Don't worry, even in the midst of all of this, my wisdom never left. Now, if you know the story of Solomon, you're like, whoa, I don't know, man. You got to think that somewhere between, wife 732 and 733, you might have stepped back and gone, am I overdoing it? Maybe one more wife is not really what I need. I believe at the end of his life he had like 1,000 wives. Okay, again, insert your own more than one wife joke here. All right, but it's like you think, okay, is wisdom? Did it really? Maybe after you got the first two, it would be like, okay, I don't know. I remember reading a story about the Mormons, and Joseph Smith embraced plural marriage, and he explained at one point. There's a story about Brigham Young explaining it to Brigham Young, that, oh, this is what you need to do. You need to do plural marriage. You need to have multiple wives. And Brigham Young's response was something to the effect of, oh, don't put this burden on me. Okay? And you go, well, good for you, Brigham Young. Way to go. Way to stick up for things. It turns out that Brigham Young had like 58 wives. Okay? So like a while back, there was a football player named Young. Steve Young, I think it was, a football quarterback dude. I'm not a football fan. But they were saying that he's a descendant of Brigham Young. And at first, when I first heard that, I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. That's sort of neat. I met somebody yesterday who, you know the town Madison, Illinois? I met somebody yesterday who's a relative of the guy who I'm sorry, that's completely. But at first I thought, wow, you're a descendant of Brigham Young. How cool is that? Then I realized that Brigham Young had 58 wives and like 200 kids. Okay, so it's like, it's not really a big deal. Like everyone named Young in Utah is related to Brigham Young. Okay, so again, I don't know whether they have like family meetings or what, I don't know. But be that as it may, in all of this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. Now, obviously, clearly this has to be somebody with power and money. Okay? Because there's a lot of things that my eyes want that my pocketbook denies. Okay? I don't even bother checking with the wife about it. It's like, I know that I don't have enough money. You know, I would love to have my own airplane. You know, I think nothing about having a Gulfstream jet. That would be like the coolest thing in the world. Now, I know I can't fly it. I get that. But you know what? But, you know, I look at the bank account and I go, okay, how about a little plastic model of a, maybe. I wouldn't even go that far. Okay. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this is what I'm going to end with this thought, two thoughts. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. Okay, so he's saying there is a certain reward in the process of doing it. So it's not all bad. There is a certain delight here. Yet, when I surveyed all that my hands had done and that what I toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. And that's kind of like Qohelet's favorite refrain there. Everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Even though there was some enjoyment in the process, even though and so we're going to get back, like, think about that thought, because when we get to the end of the book and we kind of look at it and say, okay, well, so what's the big idea with this book? What do we do with this book? What do the Jewish readers of 500 BC, what are they doing with this book? Okay, and you think, okay, he's giving you a little snippet there that there is some joy in the journey. I don't know, perhaps something like that. All right, well, next week we'll continue talking to Qohelet, or letting Qohelet talk to us. Any questions? Any questions, comments, complaints, words of wisdom, great thoughts at large? In the school, they always say questions, comments, concerns, kind of thing. All right. Well, thank you very much. And let's see. It's 9:07 according to my watch.